Welcome to Tuesday, September 29th. We are going to start looking at food webs and food change. While you're watching the video, I'd love for you to open your Ecology Digital Notebook, Part 2.
Well, you voted for it, so we braved the cold and these gigantic cameras to get some epic shots.
So it's story time. When I was a kid, I never saw bald eagles, and there's a reason for that. It was a long time ago when I was a kid, and bald eagles were endangered. In fact, across the whole United States, there are only 414 nesting pairs of bald eagles. And um, they didn't really know what was happening because bald eagles live over 30 years, and they were finding people were observing and noticing there weren't any young bald eagles. Bald eagles don't get their white head and tails until they're 3 or 4 years old, and they were noticing there weren't many young bald eagles. And they did a little more research and observed and found that the shells were really thin, and so the bald eagles would sit on their eggs and the eggs would break, and very few babies were hatching. And so then they were doing some research and found out that there was a chemical that they had been spraying in the air, a pesticide for many years called DDT. And this DDT chemical kills bugs really well. But what happens, it like gets into the water system where the fish live, and little fish get eaten by bigger fish, which get eaten by bigger fish, and bald eagles catch some of those bigger fish. And unfortunately, the pesticide DDT was, as different things eat them, it builds up. The older the organism is, the more things it's eaten, that chemical builds up in their body. So by the time the bald eagle was getting it, there's a really high concentration of DDT. And that was causing the shells to not be very strong. And so in 1972, they banned the use of DDT in the United States. And from that banning of DDT, the nesting pairs has gone up significantly. So the last time this particular chart was recorded was in 2014, and there was almost 15,000 pairs of nesting pairs of bald eagles. So how many of you have been able to see a bald eagle in the wild? I just saw one today walking my dog. I remember very, very vividly the first time I saw a bald eagle in the wild. I was actually in West Virginia driving along a river, and I looked up and saw a bald eagle, and I was so excited. It was the most amazing thing because the only other place I'd seen them was in the zoo, in books, and on TV. And so that's a success story. I mean, and I guess a point I want to make in the story is that if we make changes, there can be some huge effects for that. And I remember when I was a kid, a lot of the lakes were polluted. Lake Superior, Lake Erie, they were terrible. And they have made regulations on industry. They can't dump pollutants into the lakes anymore. And now they are clean and fresh and nice. So the point is, we can make a change. And it's not just on each individual making changes for our environment and affecting the global change, it's industry. So that's something I want you to think about as we move forward with our choices we make. Thank you for listening to my story. So we are going to go over notes. You've already answered this question. Some people had to download a copy and put it in their PDF. I think I fixed the problem last week. For some reason, I got logged out of Google, and that happens. You can't access your documents. So hopefully this has fixed it. One thing I noticed when we did this the first time, a lot of people did not write the definition of an ecosystem in this place. So in this location on your page, you'll type the living and non-living objects in the environment, and then you have the abiotic factors and the examples and the biotic factors and the examples. And so you're typing that in. Hopefully you have that. If not, there will be a video you can watch to get that information or a copy of this slideshow. Types of organisms. So there are three main types of organisms. There's producers, consumers, and decomposers. So you can see it has a guide here for what you need to do. If you are in Notability, you'll have to put a text box, and you can make it so it's solid, so it covers up what's behind it, and type in that text box. So producers make their own food, carry out photosynthesis. Plants, trees, bushes are all examples of photosynthesis. Basically, when you look outside, anything that's green carries out photosynthesis. Plants give off oxygen, which is what was happening in the pond ecosystem lab you were doing. Is when the sun was out, the plants were carrying out photosynthesis, creating oxygen, and that is why your dissolved oxygen went up during the day when you were measuring that. Consumers, they eat plants or other animals, mammals, fish, and birds. Those are a few examples of consumers. So basically, anything that has to eat something for energy is a consumer. Decomposers, they're also consumers, but we give a different name because they tend to break down dead organisms, bacteria, mushrooms, earthworms. Decomposers tend to really consume dead things. Now you might think of a bird like a scavenger. They eat the dead things, but they're not really breaking it down in the same way. They're more like a consumer because they go to the bathroom. Bacteria, mushrooms, earthworms kind of produce more soil. All right, dragging the labels to the correct organism. Unfortunately, if you are using Notability, you're going to have to write in which one is the producers, which ones are the consumers, and which ones are the decomposers. So here we are. We got consumer, decomposer, producer, consumer. You can write those in. Notice the decomposer is also a consumer. So we have a squirrel, an earthworm, a plant, and that last one is a vulture. Habitats. Again, when we do the definition for habitat, you have to type it here, and that is, a habitat is the home of an organism. There's two parts that we're going to look at within the habitat. Community, and the community is an interacting group of organisms in an ecosystem. So basically, a community is all living things in a habitat. A population is a group of the same organism. So for example, when you did your pond ecosystem, there was a population of fish. There was a population of humans, probably on the farm. There was a population of animals on the farm that we couldn't see. There was a population of the pond plants in the water producing oxygen. So those are all different populations. But when you take that pond ecosystem habitat and you have your plants and fish and all the other things that are living, all those populations together, they're called a community, and that's the living part. A biome. Hopefully you've heard of biomes, but if not, it is a large community of plants and animals with a similar climate. So what puts biomes together is really they have that similar climate. So when you look at the map around the world, there's two main types of biomes. You have aquatic biomes and terrestrial biomes. Aquatic biomes are the biomes that include all the water. Oceans, lakes, marshes, those are aquatic. Aquatic means water. Terrestrial means land. So any biome that is on land. would be a terrestrial biome. And a few examples are tundra, taiga, desert, and forest. Minnesota is a really unique state. We have 3 biomes in our state. We have a prairie biome, we have a deciduous biome, and we have a coniferous biome. So we have 3 distinct biomes in our state. And so that's something to think about. Food chain. And this is really cool. When I looked at the pre-assessment that you took, which I put your scores down, but they don't count against your grade because I'm not expecting you to know any of this. We haven't taught it yet. And the majority of you got the food chain question right. So that's really cool. I know I don't need to spend a lot of time on food chains, and we'll kind of start looking more at food webs and understanding a little bit deeper about food chains. So a food chain is a diagram that shows what organism eats what. And where did the original source of energy come from? This is an important thing. It came up in your pond ecosystem lab. This is going to come up over and over. Where did the original source of energy come from? And it kind of sounds tricky, but it's not. It's where plants get their energy, which is the sun. So that's something to think about. The sun is our original source of energy. Plants use the sun to create energy or food. So a food web is the many food chains to show how energy flows in an ecosystem. The arrows point from the prey to the predator to show which way the energy is flowing. So it flows into the mouth is the way I like to think about it, the direction of energy flow. An energy pyramid, it is a model that shows the energy that is lost within the ecosystem. So type that in here, energy pyramid, and then primary consumer eats producers or plants. A secondary consumer eats herbivores. Herbivores are organisms that only eat plants. And the tertiary consumer is the top of the food chain, and nothing usually eats them. Usually they survive until they die. I mean, sometimes the young gets eaten or various other things happen. All right, we have an exit ticket. You're going to go to this Padlet.com, type in this, and answer each of those questions. You'll get credit for that when you answer at least one. Try to answer them all.